tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the MSP Cyber Roundtable. I'm here with David and Andrew from Xcitium. I'm super excited because I have two first-time guests to the show today. We're going to be talking about the cyber hygiene lifecycle. Since you guys are both new today, I like to play a little game here, but I want to get your backstories out there for the public to really understand, like, how do these people end up at basically the top of the cyber landscape, right? Like, how do we as practitioners in our career reach those places? What did the journey look like on the road? David and Andrew, I'd love to just start with one of you and just get a little, like, okay, I'm in security now, but the road that led here was what, right? Where did you guys start out your careers? David, you want to go first?
Sure. I started off my career accidentally in cyber in general. I was working at a Kinko's coffee shop one night, and everything went to hell when the network went down, and we lost everything. And support called up. I was the only one at like 3 a.m. in the store, and they just started walking me through and how to rebuild the network and get the systems back online. That then led me to end up working in the security department, or the computer department for the organization. That then led me to being the computer services manager for the region. And then from there, I transitioned into a career at Boston College as an information technology consultant, advising professors and faculty on high-level technology and computers and things like that. That then got me into security after an event happened at the Boston College. We had to get the FBI involved and do some stuff, and then we were like, we need a cyber program. And then they're like, you, go ahead, go create one, go do one.
So what year was that Boston College decided to take things seriously, I guess? Like, we all went through that, right?
2000, right after.
2000.
Yeah, so we had a breach in student services, and visas were stolen. Those visas were later used for nefarious purposes later that year.
And that at that time, I'm sure there was like shock factor all around, right?
Yeah,
because the idea that these digital systems that were running our lives could fail in that way, I think that was pretty new at that time, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we had antivirus. It was called Dr. Solomon.
But the antivirus was like, because if you didn't have antivirus, your computer might get slow, or you might end up spewing spam. Like, It wasn't like identities were going to get stolen in 2000, right?
Correct, right. And so that changed everything, how we looked at things and how that went about. So I was then tasked to figure out how to make this never happen again. And so I developed using commercial off-the-shelf software and cobbled together several different independent functions of software from a same vendor into a unique, holistic, host-based security program. That vendor then sold that concept to the Department of Defense. DISA picked it up, the Defense Information Security Agency. President Bush signed Fragmentary Order 13, mandating that program on every single computer government-wide, starting with the DoD. And they reached out to me and asked me to come join them at the DoD to help do that, since I was the one that kind of put it all together and created it early on.
So wait, this was early 2000s, right?
So now we're talking 2001, 2002.
So at this time, the government was like basically just coming to the realization that locking their secure network away from the internet, right, wasn't going to keep it safe because it had all this connectivity, these porous borders that you couldn't just have like the super secure network on separate lines and somehow it stayed super secure,
Right.
right? So then you had to start defending everything, right?
Yeah, you had exfil, you had patches, you had vulnerabilities. So we did a lot, and then I ended up with SpaWar, NAVC. NAVC and SpaWar wanted to be the first ones to have it deployed and operational. So I went around the country doing that for them. Later on, I ended up at Langley for about a year doing it for them. And then the Air Force contacted and said, we'd like you to come out to AFCERT in San Antonio, but we want the program rebuilt. Before it was all stovepipe. Each base or command was its own entity and its own run item. And the Air Force didn't want that. They wanted roll up. They wanted all their data in one place so they could see that. And so they had just taken their NOSCs and their SOCs, combined them into 4 global SOCs and NOSCs for the entire Air Force globally. So we redesigned the program, and we deployed it out of those NOSCs for that side of the hemisphere for each of the 4 different areas. And then we created roll-ups to AFCERT in San Antonio. And spent a lot of money doing that, but the end goal was it used to take 7 working man days to find true source. At the end of our project, it took 7 minutes to find true source.
So you're talking about real-time threat analysis, right?
Yep.
Is that
so? A ping goes off over here. It would take 7
Yeah.
days for that information to reach people who could tell somebody to do something about that. Now it took 7 minutes.
Yeah, and that's we're now reaching a moment where mom and pops need that kind of response time. Realistically, this year it seems like the year of it's not even like AI like attack bots. It's like AI of every type just like thrashing around the internet, right? And we have to find bad actors who might be accidental bad actors or on purpose bad actors, right? And we have to threat score them. We have to start mitigating those things in pretty much real time these days.
Yep.
I'm curious. When did you go back? When did you go back out into private sector? Was that what brought you to Xcitium, or was there?
So after that, for the Air Force, I then went to the Army, and the Army wanted the same thing done, but the Army didn't have 4 NOSCs; they had 1. So we then had to make the program support over 1 million endpoints for the Army with just one central function. Then Saudi Aramco had their breach in 2011, and they asked the U.S. government for subject matter experts to go over, and I was selected as the endpoint, the Security Operations Center, and the forensic endpoint subject matter expert to go over and help them. So I spent about 180 days there. I was only supposed to be there for 30, but you know how that works. They then offered me a position to stay on and help them rebuild their entire cybersecurity operations from the ground up, which I did. I then developed their threat intelligence operations. That then turned into a national program. We did a bunch of stuff there. Then I transitioned in 2020 to the UAE, where I started working for MSPs and then the largest telecom in the Middle East. And that kind of took me back into private world. And then a couple months ago, we decided that maybe it's time to go home. We've been away for almost 20 years. Let's go see what America looks like again. And so came back home to Xcitium.
Well, that's a lot of stops in that journey. It does seem like while you ended up in security accidentally, that was pretty early in your career comparatively. At what point did you say I'm a security guy? Was that after the breach at Boston College? Like when did
I
you?
would actually like to know the answer to that question as well, Matthew.
I think
tell, David.
I became a security guy when I went to Langley.
Okay, that's when you felt like you were the security guy, but it seemed like people were calling you the security guy before that.
They were, but my official titles was like system engineer or systems administrator or things like that. I didn't actually get security until that point. And then I became a security consultant and architect, and that's kind of was like, okay, I guess I'm a security guy now.
You know, it's what you're describing there it's an interesting thing I see in people's careers. Sometimes when other people often declare you the expert before you're comfortable owning it, particularly if you actually have a skill in an area, right? The wiser you become, the dumber you feel typically.
God.
The
Matthew, there's actually a funny story. And I can't believe that David's not sharing it, but you know what? I'm going to out him. I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out there. So, being a security guy, that's kind of always been in our colleague here, David Brown's blood. When he was hired initially at Xcitium,
you were there.
The CEO, I'm sorry, David, the CEO of our company came and says, I would love you to be the manager of our SEs. Right, David?
Okay.
Was that what it was?
Yep.
And David, the sales SE stands for sales engineers.
Yeah.
David thought he was asking, what did you thought it stood for, David?
Security engineer?
Yeah, the last role I was at when I was with Etisalat in the UAE, I was the senior director of security operations services and security engineering.
Yeah.
And so we called them SEs. And
It's
so
funny.
when I was asked to take over the SE role after their head stepped down, I was like, oh, sure, I've done this. And then 2 weeks later, I'm like, oh, these are sales guys.
Yeah. And so now he's managing our sales engineers, and he's managing our SOC services, and he's taking care of our CISO responsibilities. He is a jack of all trades, but he's very multifaceted when it comes to his security expertise. I know our team's leaning on him a lot. So,
well, most okay, and this is it's a private public sector thing, right? Because in the public sector, SE is, in IT is almost always security engineer, right? But in the private sector, SE is part of the sales team. But SEs typically don't start out as sales guys, right? They start out as engineers, and then they want to get closer. They want to get closer to the customer, right? And they join that customer facing team. So what? How was that experience, David?
It's a learning curve. I'm not gonna lie. There's a bit there that's, I would say it's uncomfortable. It's just there's a lot that I've tried to make it so I am customer away. Like, oh, don't go behind the door. That's the security team. Oh, you can't talk to them, right? I don't want to be out and shaking hands and wearing suits and walking around.
Well, the SE's job is to make sure the sales guys don't get the vendor in trouble, right? So
the SE's job is to make sure that the sales guy speaks as little as humanly possible and doesn't put our foot in our mouth. Because as salespeople, we love to talk and we love to gab and we love to overpromise and underdeliver. And David's team is responsible for helping us to do the opposite in underpromising and overdelivering, which they've done a great job of, by the way.
So Andrew, are you bred sales guy, or did you end up here? Like what led you here to Xcitium?
Oh my gosh, no. Well, Matthew, by the way, thank you for having me. Thank you for having us. One of the things that led me here to Xcitium, I come from over 20 years of sales experience. The last 12 years primarily has been in the private equity space, working for one private equity company that had over 70 technology companies in its portfolio. I had sales management experience when I came in. I came in to manage one of the companies in this portfolio that was actually a DMS company, document management software as a service provider organization. Did really well that first year and then was quote unquote promoted. Within private equity, that really doesn't mean promoted. That just essentially means, hey, you're doing a great job with this team and building them. By the way, we'd like you to keep your responsibilities with this team, but also there's another sales team over here that's not a DMS software, but they're an MSP. Could you manage them to sell managed IT services? Sure, we could do that. You're doing a good job there. Hey, could you go over to this other team and help them to build a sales team that does professional services? So I spent a lot of time there. And you know what? Really didn't give cybersecurity much of a thought until I moved on to another role as a VP of channel sales for a large network of MSPs called the 20. They were resellers of many different cybersecurity solutions, Blockworks, SentinelOne, Huntress, ThreatLocker. And I really started to realize at that point how significant cybersecurity was. Because to me, essentially, selling SaaS as a service was just selling licenses. It was pushing EULAs. Selling managed IT services, it should have been more important to me then, but I was more focused on pushing my sales guys just to say, hey, listen, go sell our help desk. That's really what you're going to do. Selling professional services, the same thing. You're selling hours. When I got to the 20s specifically, and we started selling all this software that was EDR, MDR, XDR, AV, I began to realize the importance of these cybersecurity offerings and how expensive these breaches, how intense the remediation process, how all of that could be. And the biggest mistake I really see companies making is treating cybersecurity as a cost center instead of.
I was about to say that, Andrew.
Right?
As an MSP in 2025, right?
Yes.
Everything in IT is a cost center except for cyber and AI. So.
And that's what's great is when I landed at Xcitium, it was very eye-opening because we're coming here. We have this one proprietary technology in zero dwell containment that is something that no one else in the competitive landscape doesn't have. ThreatLocker doesn't have it. SentinelOne doesn't have it. Blockworks doesn't have it. CrowdStrike doesn't have it. And so it's very unique. It differentiates us, and it really helps us to obviously help the MSPs that we work with, help the direct customers that we work with, help the resellers and the partners that we work with, and help them to be able to puff their chest out and be proud and say, hey, we're offering something that's going to drastically help you, that's going to protect your business, that's going to help you to operate, that's going to ensure that your operation is not going to have any disruption. So it's been a long 20-year journey to get here with the last 12 years in the technology space, but we're here, and it's a really great spot to be in. To your point, Matthew, the only two things in our space that I feel like are truly recession-proof is AI and cybersecurity.
Yeah, and we just used basically sales industry jargon, like the cost center word, we're going to come back to the Xcitium value space. I think we're naturally going to end up there pretty quickly, actually. But I just want to take a moment, Andrew, because it seems like I have a king of the trade here, and our audience. We got a bunch of hardworking MSP owners, and they're learning, sales motions, and they're learning how to improve practice and marketing. I would love to have a little sell this pen moment with you. Feel free to redirect if it's uncomfortable, but
sure.
Is there like a really dumb thing you sold early in your career that like we could just use as an example?
Oh my God.
Did you sell like kitchen knives or something like that? Like,
oh, you know what? It's so funny.
Encyclopedias door to door.
Jeez. I think the goofiest things that I have ever sold, when I was in college, I actually used to sell jewelry at Movado Jewelers, like watches, rings, whatever.
Okay.
So I sold that. And then right before I graduated, I was actually working for a Motorola reseller peddling two-way radio devices to civil service entities in different locations.
So wait, what year was that?
Oh God, 2006, 2005. Okay,
that is so perfect, Andrew. First of all, Motorola's gone, so we don't have to worry there.
Oh, they're good. Yes.
Secondly, at 2006, right, was this sort of transition moment in analog radio, right? Because Motorola had been industry leader for what, 2-3 decades at that point?
Oh, absolutely. The push to talk and the two-way, yes.
But the Chinese knockoffs had started to get really good, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so your I mean, how did you sell that value proposition? How did you say that this, like, how did you get that across home plate, and how did you justify the Motorola premium?
So here's what's funny about this, Matthew. So we had a lot of competitors. There was Kenwood, which was actually it was a Chinese competitor.
I remember.
Yeah.
And they started out, they were a joke, but then all of a sudden they were basically undifferentiated after a while. So
Kenwood, like the car stereo?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So a few of the things that we did, at that time, oh my gosh, Matthew, I can't believe you're taking me down memory lane like this. Like, this is crazy. Jeez. So a few of the things that we did is we created battle cards inside of like our sales team, right? Just like we do with different software products. So obviously with Motorola, it's like, okay, look, it's an American product. Like, here's the warranty that you have on it. Here's like, all of these bells and whistles and the guarantees and the everything else. And it was great. And you know what? And for I would say like police, fire, EMS, like that still was a gold standard. And it's like, okay, because they were doing these critical jobs where people's lives were on the line. They're like, you know what?
We need the best.
To work, right? Like, we're going to do this. Now, if you're going though to like a construction company to sell it and cash is king and they're talking about bottom line, you could tell them about how great the warranty is all day, about how reliable it is all day.
No, they don't care.
They don't care. They're going to buy that Kenwood product for half the price, and they're not going to care when it breaks in 2 or 3 years because they're just going to buy another one.
Let me stop right there. So what would you do in that situation if you're if you realize the guy on the other end is lowest cost denominator construction industry guy, right? Yes. And he's just looking for the volume price. You disqualify him. What would you do there?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I think a lot of it is about finding out really what makes these guys tick, right? It's like, okay, you know what? You're going to be spending more money, with our product now specifically. But let me ask you a question. You know what? How significant is communication for you and your guys when you're on a job site, right? Well, it's extremely significant. Well, we just want something that allows us to talk to each other. This will do that. Okay, well, that's great. That's great. But you guys are working with deadlines on every job, right? Well, yeah, of course we are. Okay, great. If you had a failure or lack of communication or a communication breakdown, if there were different, devices, two-way devices that failed, would that put you behind schedule? He said, yeah, I guess we would, because we'd have to, run around and manually communicate with each other and whatever. He's like, great. And as if you fall behind schedule and you don't meet those deadlines, what's that going to inevitably do to your business? And you start asking them these questions that lead them down a road to answer, to show them answer that, hey, your product as a more reliable product is going to ensure they meet the deadlines. It's going to ensure they build fidelity with their clients, and it's going to ensure they have a reputation where it's going to create repeat business for them. So you say to them, really, Mr. Customer, Mr. Prospect, what I'm doing for you, I'm not proposing to you that I buy your solution. What I'm proposing to you is that we enter into a partnership where I help you drive revenue for your business. And it's going to make you look like a hero. It's going to boost your evaluation. It's going to boost your EBITDA. It's going to help your team to meet their goals. It's all about positioning it in a manner of where you could say to someone, what are your goals and how can I enable you to fulfill those goals? So that's how I did it as a young buck. Nowadays, I try to guide other salespeople down the same road of question-based selling.
So I love that story, and maybe you're projecting a little bit from your future to your past, but it sounds like threat modeling in radios. Clearly, that's the way you talk about security value, right? That's how you differentiate the MSP with that premium stack of services and product, right? That are real. And this is the segue into cyber hygiene, right? Mm-hmm. Because cyber hygiene is this thing that's not super sexy on the surface, right? Mm-hmm. But really speaks directly to that core MSP value, solving for those potential business threats. 100%. So I would love, David, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here, okay? And today's about the cyber hygiene lifecycle. I've got my own ideas here, but I'm curious. We use this term lifecycle, and I know that the idea of a life cycle isn't necessarily that there's a start and an end, because in security, you don't end, right? But if you had to choose where things start, where do you think the cyber hygiene life cycle starts?
Well, if we're talking about whether it starts at the endpoint, the perimeter, things like that, it starts where the most effective tool is going to be. And for me, that always starts on the outside, right? About dark IT or stealth IT, things like that. That's the first thing an organization needs to get a handle on when they're doing cyber hygiene, is they need awareness of what they have. If they're just aware of everything they have, they're in a far better position than if they have the best security tool but don't know where it is or what it is. So that's where it always starts, is awareness. That awareness must happen, must be continuous, and must evolve as their industry or their teams evade them, because that's what happens. I've seen that in giant organizations, Department of Defense. You know how many times we've gone into a building and find a home router stuffed in a drop ceiling because somebody wanted to get to the internet and play a game, right? And so that awareness and that visibility is the key, and that's where hygiene starts. Because once you can see something, you know what to clean and what to fix.
And I'm realizing I just made a mistake because I did not define cyber hygiene. But before we continue this conversation, cyber hygiene is the basic foundation you put in place to just keep your cyber clean, right? To keep your IT clean, to keep your systems and your business clean from a cyber perspective, so that you've maximally positioned yourself for defense. There's other things you need to do, right? But it's that foundational layer. In addition to that, not only can you not do some of the more sophisticated things unless you've done the cyber hygiene effectively, but it's also the most effective spend of investments in cybersecurity is in that cyber hygiene. And you're using terms like discovery and awareness. I totally agree. I think a lot of our viewers have learned some of the fundamentals just in the last handful of years, and they're using NIST functions. So this is the identify category. And that's where we start, right, is identifying all the things. So you were talking about business applications and surfaces, right? What other types of things do we want to discover and be aware of or identify before we can really protect them?
Well, that's it, right? You have to know what's your infrastructure, what's outside your infrastructure, what touches your infrastructure, and where your infrastructure should be facing. And that's where that discovery and that awareness comes into play, right? So whether you're doing a SaaS model or an IFA model, right, infrastructure as a service, or compute as a service, or it's in-house, right? Mm-hmm. Where are your egress points? Where's your north and south? Where are they? And what can you do east and west when you do come in that door, right? All of that awareness needs to be found out, and that infrastructure is critical, right? And so once you identify that, you now, like you said before, we can now start cleaning that, right? If that's a DMZ and all of a sudden we notice in our discovery that the DMZ asset has east and west movement, well, that's a failure, right? That needs to be cleaned, right?
So we're looking not just for the assets, right? Where are all the surfaces and exposure? I guess we usually use the words attack exposure these days, but exposure, because it could be anywhere. Yeah, it's not necessarily
management is the buzzword.
Yeah, because it's not the outside of your firewall solely anymore. Your attack surface is everywhere, including in your pocket, right? Mm-hmm. With mobile phones. So you have to find all those surfaces and how things flow and connect, but then you're also identifying, okay, what are all the things that maybe I should be doing a better job of protecting that I'm not? Like, what are your gaps right now? What are your vulnerabilities? What are your and you just identified, and I don't know if you were referring to a legitimate flow that shouldn't be happening, or we're actually seeing an illegitimate flow. Should clearly not be happening.
Yep. And your mobile device is able to connect to guest Wi-Fi, and guest Wi-Fi in your office has access to a print farm, for example, right?
Yep.
Well, that print farm has access to the core network. So that is an east-west piece of traffic that shouldn't be allowed, right?
And that's a great example. I actually went through an exercise not too long ago where I had to resegment my office because of that exact thing, the printer, and the IoT subnet in general, right? Not only could it be potentially a relay, into the printers and then into the enterprise network, but also among devices in that space. So I mean, these days, ideally, those things can't. If you have a bunch of things like a print farm, right? The printers shouldn't even be able to talk to each other, ideally, right? Even phones maybe shouldn't be able to talk to each other except for via the designated phone switching systems, right? So, okay, so you identify all those things, and then, let's say all the things, right? All the space. What are the other categories or other areas, or what's the next step in the hygiene lifecycle?
So now that you have your awareness done and you know where everything is, right? You've identified all your potential services. You've identified your shadow IT, et cetera, et cetera.
Data.
Yep. Now the next thing is data classification. Mm-hmm. Now you go through and you start to classify the data. That way you can put data controls in place, right? Mm-hmm. Data discovery happens next because we're still in that discovery phase. Now that we have data discovery done, we go through data classification. Is this public? Is this internal? Is this internal secret? Whatever terms you want to use are fine, but they need to be predefined, right? We're going to use 5 labels, and these 5 labels mean these things. And now once you have all your data labeled and classified, you can now go to the next area, which is put a control in, right?
Hey, I want to stop there because I see this data discovery and classification domain right now. This is, from my view, the biggest engineering fight of 2025 in security is increasing the whole world's maturity around data management processes. And it is classification, it is discovery, it is retention policies, right? Lifecycle policies, stewardship even. This is an area that a few years ago was not at the top of the security radar. And now currently, even really for the last 5 years has been the area that, for example, the Center for Internet Security says is second only to knowing what devices are connected to your network, right, and what software's on them. The next thing is, where's your data? What's it doing? What's the classification? And I work with a lot of partners that struggle with this classification.
It's not easy, absolutely, and it's a nightmare too if you're starting it late in the game. And I've had experience both with private organizations and public organizations now recognizing there's a need for that. And when you're looking at like organizations like, giant oil and gas companies that have been around for almost 100 years, mm-hmm. and you're like, oh, we have to find every piece of data and now classify it and give it a label. Well, let's go hire 2,000 people to go do that.
Yeah, and we used to, and I know the government's had their data classification system for decades, but in the private sector, we didn't worry too much about this because we had the outside network and we put outside stuff in the outside network. We had the inside network. We put inside stuff in the inside network. We had this thing called a DMZ, which doesn't even exist anymore. And that was like sort of a gray space. That model's gone. Attack surfaces everywhere. And the new frontier has moved to what can users access and what can they access, right? And replacing that old model of security of those really basic security domains, right, is you draw the domain around the data boundary, and it's hard because data's everywhere, right? Yeah. So you got to track it. You got to classify it, and you don't have to make it overly complicated, but you do need a system that allows you to put controls in place, right? So
and that's what I was getting at. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to use certain words. You can use any word, right? You can call it, unicorn, as long as you define what unicorn is, right? As a classification, and that is then mapped to the control, you're good, right?
Yeah. So, and by controls, we're just talking about things you do in security to protect the data, right? So,
like whether it be DLP, firewall rules, email rules, anything that will track that data based on the classification and either prevent it from being moved to a place it shouldn't be based on classification, or at minimum alert somebody that it was moved there. And once you have your data classified, things like breaches become so much more easily managed. When some threat actor goes, oh, I'm going to release all these documents to the internet, haha, and you go, oh, they're all classified as unicorn. Well, unicorn's public release information.
Yeah.
Good luck. Marketing.
But in that scenario, we wouldn't use the B word, right? We'd be using the word incident. But I'm scared of the B word. And for anyone that just heard that, your lawyer should be the one that's telling you to use the B word, or your company's lawyer, right? Your engineers should typically not on their own of their own volition ever use that word, particularly with a customer. But you can get in trouble that way. Incident's a great word because it gets to mean whatever you define it to mean, right? So David, let's say that we're doing okay in the data domain. We've classified, we've discovered, right? Hopefully, we've put some retention controls in place and some other things that we do in data management world. Now what? You mentioned some things like DLP, but what, from a hygiene perspective in the hygiene lifecycle, what do we do after we discover the data?
After we discovered it, it's classified. Now we move on to vulnerabilities, right?
So this is CVE rated vulnerabilities, but there's some other things that are not CVE rated vulnerabilities as well.
And that's where people get hung up, right? You could have a CVE that is rated critical high, right? But when you look at it, in order to exploit that, you have to have a can of Freon, the laptop upside down and unscrewed, and 40 minutes of activity, right? That doesn't need to get patched today. The one that's medium or low, that's easily exploitable, that hits a foothold or breachhead in, those tend to be the ones that get targeted. Yeah, there are some great 0 days that get you, command execution right away, but those, aren't always the ones that are targeted. When we look at most incidences, right, the common vulnerabilities were mediums that ended up breached. Right?
Well, it's a chain, right? It's usually an attack chain, but yes, there's almost always lower level vulnerabilities involved someplace in that
higher
chain.
Level that people look at that. So when I talk about patching vulnerabilities, I talk about bringing in vulnerability intelligence. Right? There's some great companies out there. Intel 471 does a great job on that, right? Where they actually, look and listen and see what is being asked for and what is the demand of a breach or something to actually go through and hit a vulnerability, right? Oh, this vulnerability is on a million things. Well, who's got the tool to help me go do that? And that's the type of ones you want to target first, right? So we want to get rid of, in theory, all vulnerabilities, but every organization has a risk appetite, and you need to know where that risk appetite is, how to align that to your vulnerabilities, and then go through and tackle them that way. And again, you start from the outside and you work your way in on those vulnerabilities, right? Down to the phone in your pocket.
When you say outside, again, we're talking to outside of the attack surface area, which is not necessarily the outside of your network, but it could be, right? So that's one of the outsides. But the outside's also the desktop I'm talking on right now.
Yeah.
Right. So
So you start from the furthest away from your organization, which has the higher chance of having a problem, and you work backwards in. So if you have remote workers or laptops or anything like that, those
all of them are outside
first, and then you bring it in closer, right?
Now there's CISAs of course has their KEV database. It's pretty small, but it's highly active vulnerabilities there that you should definitely, if you don't know about the KEV, you should be watching that. When a vulnerability gets added to the KEV, you should make sure that that vulnerability doesn't exist in your environment. CVSS scores have sort of fallen apart the last few years for reasons you just brought up around criticality. But it's worth noting that the Forum of Incident Responders that develops that CVSS standard, which is an impact score, they've also developed another scoring system, exploit prediction scoring system, EPSS, which is now becoming the industry standard. And if you do use those scores,
in my opinion,
it's not only is it a better scoring system, I think it's become the de facto standard. And if your organization is not using EPSS, you should be using that to target those vulnerabilities. We have a solution that uses those EPSS scores to target that, but many vulnerability products these days have standardized around that. And from a practice perspective, if you're putting that hygiene practice in place, EPSS scores are really straightforward and simple to implement. And then, as David said, you've got your asset list, right? And you target from your higher risk surfaces, right, in towards the lower risk surfaces. So vulnerability management, let's say you're kicking butt there, which, by the way, before we move on from vulnerability management, guys, patch management is not super valuable to the end customer. What I mean by that is it's in the cost center category. You call it vulnerability management because you've used some risk intelligence on what you're patching. Now it is vulnerability management. It's higher value. You can bill for it, and if you're not already billing for it, you should come up with an SLA, figure out how to meet it, and deliver that into your customers. So that is a really valuable cyber hygiene service that service providers should be implementing into their practices. David, you've done all of that. Are we at the end of our, sort of prototypical hygiene life cycle? What's after that?
So now that we have the physical devices patched, we have a patch cycle coming in. I prefer to do daily, right? So I like agent-based scanners or policy-based scanners that look at things every single day or do real time. There are a lot of good tools out there. And side note, if you have an agent-based vulnerability scanner, right, you can then use things like OVAL, which is the Open Vulnerability Access Language, or whatever the A stands for, and write threat hunting rules and have your vulnerability scanner do continuous threat hunting for you. Because if this DLL is at this level, or if this is there, if this registry key exists, or if this is changed, if this configuration is changed, that's potential malicious activity, right? Like, look at the registry, and then if shadow volume copy is either set to 0 or off, that's potential pre-ransomware. And so every couple hours, your vulnerability scanner is going through its list of rules. There's your OVAL rule to look for that. And boom, it's set to 0. That creates an alarm, and boom, you find that, right? But again, having vulnerabilities checked constantly is a must in today's world because they're just so rampantly coming out. So now that we have that done, now we start looking at the controls. Are the controls configured correctly for the goal that they're there for, right? I do things like mitigation scorecarding. So you'll take a control and say, the control says it detects these things, it deceives these things, right? You go through the 5 Ds, right? So you have detect, deceive, deny, degrade, and destroy. And then you score the control against that to make sure it's configured to do what it says on the box. And then, of course, you test that. And you do that quarterly, right? You want to make sure that the control is still doing what it's supposed to do in the way it's supposed to do it for the threats from yesterday and for the threats from tomorrow. And that's a big thing people don't do.
I want to stop there and talk about controls for just 1 minute before we switch topics here. 20 years ago, the federal government was basically the only one that had well-defined control architectures. And even in the federal government, it was sometimes not well-defined. But they were leaders there. These days, though, there's a number of really great control architectures that you can use out of the box. You pull them off the shelf when you're in that situation and you use them. And the reason I want to point this out is because a lot of companies have, over the years, created control architectures based on some random person in the world asked them if they had XYZ security, and they added it to a list, which, by the way, is the dumbest way to spend security money. So if you're just going to spend a lot of money, and you're not necessarily going to take care of all the risk spaces. So what you should be using is a comprehensive control architecture, and you used to have to, if you were going to architect those, build them from scratch. But these days, for small businesses, medium enterprise, large enterprise, there's really great prioritization matrices you can pull off the shelf from Center for Internet Security, ISO, CIS, any number of other standards. And I heavily encourage that service providers bring that GRC knowledge into their organization. If they need help with that, they seek out that help. And implement those controls in line with someone else's plan. Frankly, there's many thousands of people that have put these plans together. There's no reason to invent them. And if you get in trouble, someone else developing the plan is what's going to save you from liability. So with that in place, David, I know that Xcitium's at the really at the forefront of some of these control architectures. I'd love to talk about where did Xcitium come from? What was the dream? What's the cutting edge today? What do you guys bring into the table in this space here?
I'll let Andrew. That's a sales thing, so I'll let Andrew run with that.
No.
I've been talking for a while.
I appreciate that, David. You're kind. No, Matt. You know what? One of the things that we could say when we talk about controls, when we talk about Xcitium, when we talk about where we fit into the landscape today, the smartest organizations aren't asking, do we have controls in place? They're asking, do our controls adapt to context and scale with our business and provide real measurable assurance, right? So with Xcitium, what we want to do is we want to ensure that the tools that we're providing are going to enable our customers, whether they're MSPs, whether they're direct customers, they're going to enable them to scale. When we talk about Xcitium, we talk about the genesis of the organization. We are a cybersecurity company at heart. We were originally Komodo. Is anyone actually, Matt, have you ever heard of the brand Komodo?
Of course. I'm sure I bought way too many certificates from you guys.
Well, no, before the certificate even, Komodo was a retail EPP. It had one of the first.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
Award-winning antivirus and firewall that was free. It's still today for home use. There's still a free version available for home use. There's a paid version as well, but it all stacks and grew into what Xcitium is, right? The love of security, the love of protecting and making things feel safe. I mean, we have 23 unique patents worldwide on our technology.
Absolutely.
So, there's a lot of sweat and tears that went in, right? We're not a company, we're not an MSSP or another company that's rebranding other people's tools or even licensing other people's engines and putting our own wrap around it, right? This is built up and grown with us as an organization since the 1980s, early 90s?
Yes.
Now, when you talk about those retail box sets, I remember this because I remember buying a whatever widget from some electronics store, and your Komodo license would be like in the box basically, or literally the install media would be in the box.
Yeah.
I think if you were an OEM and you were like, I need 100,000 of this to like package it, like you guys were a go-to, right, for a really long time, and we don't buy things that way anymore as consumers typically.
And even now, a lot of the consumer places, right, don't even want that because it's all viewed as bloatware now, right? Because there's so many choices, but you still have a lot of the big box brands, Dell, HP, always throwing either purposeful malware on you in the form of Norton 360 or less effective controls like McAfee and things like that. Now, I worked for McAfee. I used their stuff for a while. Part of the entire DoD defense was built on that. So you gotta give.
I want to slow down there. I don't want to point at specific vendors here, but when you use the word malware, I think what you're talking about is there are some vendors out there right now. There's one really big one, right, where if you're getting this free AV product, actually, there's a lot of telemetry going back to home base.
Yeah,
and it includes in some cases every website you visit, every page you visit, right, among other things. And so there's a lot of concern that you buy the security product, right, to make yourself safer. And the real question is how much safer are you really, right? Or are you less safe? And
it's not that the company is intending to be malicious with it, but if that gets out or goes somewhere or does something, then malicious activity can be generated from that data that goes back to them, right?
Right.
And there are reasons why certain tool sets, like our own, for example, when we do DNS blocking, we send a GUID. We don't send the domain, we send a hash GUID that is then looked up and says, oh, okay, this is where you want to go. Sure, yes or no, right? We're not sending, same thing when we send for our cloud scanner, which is our AI cloud scanning engine, right? We're sending things in a way that doesn't link it to you personally unless you have an account subscribed and you've linked that account to us. And now that way we can send back to your portal the results. But otherwise, when you do something like that, that's anonymous.
Well, and the reason you're doing that, right, is for security. The reason some other vendors might not be doing that is actually because the consumer using this free software is actually the product, right? They're selling your
the data is the product, not the software. And that's not something that we ever do, right? We have our transparency audits going back that are available for anyone to look at, right? We're not selling data. We're not data brokers, right? At the end of the day, we're focused on the security. The tool does exactly what it says it does on the tin and doesn't take from you, doesn't share, doesn't sell anything.
Now, I want to point out here that it's one of my pet peeves, actually, when I'm a GRC guy, right? I come in, our organization comes in, and we run on standards, right? And then the reason we run on standards, and I pointed to it earlier, is A, if there's a problem, right? The fact that someone else built the control architecture is going to save you from liability, right? That's that commercially reasonable standard. But there's actually truth behind that, right? It's not just a legal argument, which is that when you follow these architectures, you're going to make the best use of security dollars. Now, in almost every security standard, what's recommended for spending in this, let's call it the anti-malware, right, space. I don't want to call it the endpoint protection or the EDR, MDR, or acronym space. I want to call it anti-malware because that's really the center of what we're talking about here at this exact moment. What the security standards say is you should have a tool. It should have centralized telemetry. It should make sure that there's updates, right? And it should spot some anomalies. And there's a lot of bells and whistles people invest in, right, that provide dubious value, right? So I want people, to really realize that, when you're working with small businesses, right, getting a, you don't have to shoot for the $30 CrowdStrike license, right?
Right.
To satisfy all of the security standards you could possibly need to meet, right, with the end clients. And it's really important as a service provider to be able to position a product stack that enables you to monetize your people, right? So, and I just want to point that out because we're in that space right now. It's something I see in a lot of partners where they've been led around by the vendors and they put the money not necessarily in the place that's best for them or the end client. And so what you're speaking to right now, David, is really important to consider that there's vendors like Xcitium, right, that provide an excellent value, right? And you guys have a number of products now, and I'm actually not even familiar with all of them, but you're in this endpoint space. Where else are you guys at?
We also just acquired a new company called D2, which provides a bunch of phishing simulations, cybersecurity awareness training. Essentially, what we're trying to do is we're trying to flip the model, essentially, for a lot of our customers that we service from reactive detection to proactive containment. And that's really where our zero dwell technology comes in. But I mean, my gosh, from EDR to MDR to XDR to AV to the zero dwell technology to D2 service offerings to all the things that we provide on the front end, like essentially security assessment testing to vulnerability assessments and all these other things. David, what other new products? I mean, we're releasing new products every day.
I want to talk about D2 for a second. So you're in that. It doesn't sound like a sexy space. I know most engineers are like, security training, but earlier David was talking about the importance of cyber hygiene, and I'm going to tell you that the frontier right now that service providers need to be fighting to protect their customers, right? This is the edge of the security frontier. It is not a sexy space. It is doing anti-malware reliably, right? It is detecting anomalies reliably, right? It is the data management processes, actually doing that at all, right? And being effective at security awareness training. And security awareness training is not, I bought a security awareness training product. It is, I'm actually using this with my customers and they're actually getting trained and they're actually being less risky, right?
Yes.
I love it. I absolutely love it when my staff brings an email to me and they're like, hey, is this real? Instead of clicking the link, they're like, what should I be doing about this? I love it when they ask that question. And that's what we should expect from all of our end clients.
Well,
right?
and what's funny now that the actual training and the phishing simulations, Matthew, they're not just, hey, by the way, this is you're getting an email from a Persian prince who wants to wire you $4 million if you click on this link and share your banking information, right? These are actually legitimate.
Oh, they're sophisticated,
right?
Yeah.
These are Phishing, yeah.
Not only are they sophisticated, but by sophisticated I mean they are hard to spot, right? They have already exceeded the quality of typical email communications, and they've actually had to go back the other direction because they don't want to be better than normal email. It needs to blend in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the campaigns move rapidly. Not only are they creating excellent content, but they're creating new excellent content every week or every day. And you really need to train your users just to be really vigilant. And
yeah, it's almost scary how good it is. Absolutely.
Well, and that goes back to like when we were talking about cyber hygiene, right? If we continue down what the steps are, the last step is training and awareness, right? That should be part of your cyber hygiene, is training your staff and making sure that they have the awareness to recognize when there's bad hygiene, right? Whether that is a user deploying a new system, going, oh, I probably shouldn't plug it into this network over here, right? Or I should do this, or I should go get my certificates, follow those controls, because controls are both physical and paper, right? A policy is a control. And if somebody isn't aware and trained on the policy, they're never going to be able to uphold the control, right? And so that needs to happen right alongside the physical box that's going to block something. Is the people need to understand these are the procedures and our policies for building that box, for plugging that thing in, for using your phone.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, David. I spent a lot of time working on governance with clients. We got to wrap here in a moment. Andrew, I know that, as you noted, it wasn't always Xcitium, right? And it may have been some years since our viewers, our partners have experienced your portfolio. So if they want to learn more, if they want to engage, what's the call here?
Yeah, no. If they want to learn more, if they want to engage, I would encourage them to go to our website to check out our free tools that we have available for them, to fill out a form to learn more. Specifically, if you fill out a form to actually learn more and get connected with one of our partner account managers, one of our account executives, one of the things that I would encourage you guys to do, please specify whether you are an MSP or specify whether you are a direct enterprise type of customer. Since this is more of an MSP cyber roundtable, one of the things that I really want to encourage everyone in is that if you find the right cybersecurity vendor, if you work with someone like us, and I'm not even saying a cybersecurity vendor, I'm saying us. If you work with Xcitium specifically, we're an organization. We want to work with you to increase fidelity with you and your end clients. We want to be sure that we boost the EBITDA and value of your organization, that we help you to expand, that we help position you as consultants to your customers that have their best interest in mind. So with that being said, please come to our site. Feel more than free to fill out a form. Check out some of the great free tools that we have for you guys to use. And again, Matthew, we're just so happy that you've allowed us to spend some time with you today.
Well, thanks, guys. Next week, it looks like we've got Jonathan Schofield from Scofie back here on the roundtable. We're in part 2 of this is actually part 1 or part 2. I'm a little confused here. This is a 2-part series. This is part 1, Brace for Impact. But what we're going to be talking about is how to stay competitive, right? How are you, how are you going to position to protect your customers? So we're going to have that discussion. Jonathan's in cyber matchmaking. Come check us out next Friday. Thanks for joining today, guys. I can't wait for our I want to hear more of those sales stories, Andrew, but it'll have to be another day.
Hey, we could talk war stories anytime you want, man.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
See you guys next time.